Okay, I think we have given it some time and we are ready to get started. This is the HMIS Lead and System Administrator monthly webinar. It's May 19th, my dad's birthday actually, so happy birthday, Dad, and let's get going. We have a big full agenda today for you, and very excited to have Joyce here as our special guest as well. So why are you on this call? You should be if you are an HMIS lead or an HMIS system admin for your community. You might be involved in the data strategy locally, and so you've been assigned as a representative to keep tabs on data strategies happening locally. It may be that you're participating in ESG-CV uploading due to the CARES Act funding. There's a variety of reasons that you would be here, and we are so happy that you are. This pretty standard, just like always, you're muted on your end. There's a call-in number if the audio, computer audio isn't working for you. We will absolutely record this. We're already recording. It'll be posted to the HUD, System Admin Hub, within about a week. Just remember, either while you're asking questions today, or if you end up needing to submit an HMIS AAQ to get a question followed up with later, to try and reference the slide numbers or the content that we are going over at the time of your question. It does sometimes get a little, you know, we don't get to things super fast, or we take a little bit of time and come back to stuff. So just make sure as you're asking the question that it is has enough content in it so that we know what it is you're referencing with your question. So who's with us today? We have Fran Ledger from the SNAPS office, she, they pronouns. We have Meredith from the Partnership Center. Welcome, Meredith, she, her pronouns. Jesse Jorstad from Apt Associates, he, him pronouns. Joyce Probst McAlpine from Apt Associates is here to give us the Stella demo today, she, her pronouns. Thanks, Joyce. Brian Rocapriori from Cloudburst, he, him pronouns. I am Mary Schwartz from Apt Associates, she, her pronouns. And Melissa Wytham is in the background doing the tech and making this all possible for us. So welcome, everyone, and let's get started. We have an NHSDC debrief from HUD, from Fran, that we're going to do. We're going to walk through comparable database information that has come out recently and make sure everybody's up to speed on that. We're going to talk a little bit about the on-demand course that's coming up and available for folks. And just, it's the big hot topic on all the HUD calls and everywhere else. So of course we need to talk about it too. The EHV and home ARP funding has created some data standard implications, and we'll walk through that. Then we're going to have Joyce give us the Stella demo, and then Meredith and I will walk through fiscal year 2022 data standards. They are published and live, so we're going to go over those once more in their completeness and talk a lot. We think that it'll take a little bit of time today, the reporting implications and data collection implications of a data standard change later this year. So with that, there's a lot of shifting of videos coming and going, people coming and going. Hopefully Fran can get back on and start off with some NHSDC debrief information.
So hopefully everybody can hear me on audio. Mary, are you able to hear me?
We can hear you, yeah. Okay,
perfect. So you won't be able to see me. I don't have a video connection now, so Mary, you'll have to progress me through the slides. So for NHSDC, I just wanted to get some feedback from folks. I would love to know if you attended NHSDC, how it went for you, if there are things that you would like to see different, if there's some information that you would like HUD to provide in the next NHSDC conference, ways we can make it better, that would be great. You could submit your feedback in the Q&A box for us. That would be wonderful. I did want to give an update to folks. For those who do the certificate of completion, You've had to attend several sessions, and they're very specific sessions. Those certificates did go out last week. If you anticipated getting a certificate of completion and you didn't receive one, then Brian is going to drop into the chat the email for you to email requesting your certificate of completion and indicating the sessions that you attended and why you feel you should have gotten it and that you didn't. And so you'll be able to reach out to somebody and get some support around that. I did want to let folks know that the NHSDC Fall Conference will happen. It is anticipated to be in person. So for those of you who wanted to get back to that, that's on the horizon. It'll be in October, and it'll be in Atlanta. There's not more information about it other than that right now. There will be some more information soon, so visit the NHSDC website. Let's talk about comparable databases. So we have a few things I wanted to discuss. First, there was a whole comparable database victim service provider presentation we did at NHSDC that has been recorded. It's a lot more in-depth, so I suggest that you go there for the full presentation. I'm just doing a light skim of this information so you're aware of what we did. But we talked about what the requirements are around victim service providers' use of a comparable database. And HUD right now is really pushing an initiative to make sure that victim service providers and COCs are very clear about their roles and responsibilities, and also making sure that for comparable databases that are out there and not in compliance, that we help those vendors get into compliance. And HUD is allowing some flexibilities and allowing kind of an extended time frame for making that happen. So you're seeing a lot more focus on comparable databases and seeing a lot more support from HUD around comparable databases. So what you see up here right now is the requirements. You see the regs listed there. You also see some information that we provided at the conference that we really want victim service providers to reach out to HMIS leads for support around selecting comparable databases and to see if those comparable databases are compliant. And we really want this to be a partnership between the COC and the victim service provider. We do offer a, just like we have the vendor, HMIS vendor checklist, we also have a comparable database checklist. So you're probably familiar with that. There are some slight differences. And one of the things that we do that's a little different around comparable databases is that many of the victim service providers don't receive the same type of federal partner funding that a lot of our HMIS systems support. And so we require all the comparable databases to have all of the data elements programmed into their comparable database software, but they don't all have to be able to do the federal partner reports unless their clients, their victim service providers, have that funding source and need to be able to produce those reports. And if they do, then they also need to have those reports programmed into their system. And that's the kind of slight difference we see between those two. And if you have additional questions on that, you can definitely submit those into the AAQ. But everything else you'll see is the same as you see in the normal HMIS requirements. The next page you see a comparable database manual. We've just released it, and there'll be a link for that. It gives a lot of great information and connection to different resources that are available. There is a monitoring role that is connected to all of this. Local COCs will be monitoring victim service providers' comparable databases to ensure that they are compliant. This is a responsibility to make sure that the comparable databases are compliant. And so not all COCs do it, and some will, and we'll find that those victim service providers' databases aren't in compliance. And what we ask is for those COCs to work with the victim service providers to help in first trying to work with the vendor, get them into compliance, if that doesn't work and there needs to be a transition, that it's a supported partnership and making that transition happen. But ultimately, HUD's field office will do monitoring around comparable databases, just like they can do monitoring around the HMIS. So we want people to be aware of that. But ultimately, HUD is trying to underscore the importance of partnership and the importance of resources that HUD is bringing to bear in this to support communities. So let's take a look for a moment about the messaging that we're putting out to vendors. So for vendors, we are talking to them about the expectations around compliance for comparable databases. Clearly, no vendor, this is true in the HMIS world and in the comparable database world, nobody is 100% compliant 100% of the time. It just doesn't work that way with software development and maintaining and operating software. But the expectation is that you're always trying to be in compliance, and when you discover something is out of compliance, you're working to fix that and correct it. And then the flexibilities that we're offering is around helping communities get into compliance. So what we want to see is that when there's a discovery that there's something out of compliance, that the vendors are actively working towards compliance. And then HUD is providing resources to the vendors in the form of AAQs, which you're all hopefully familiar with. They can also request technical assistance, and there's a vendor-specific call. So that's it for the comparable database conversation. If you have victim service providers in your community that have a comparable database and are concerned about compliance, you can look at these resources to assist. If they find that they have a comparable database that is out of compliance and they need to make that transition, they can make a request for technical assistance. We are certainly going to support communities in helping them make a transition from systems that are out of compliance to helping them find systems that are in compliance and help them support them through that process. So let's talk about emergency housing vouchers and home ARP for a moment. So this is some of this is some fresh information that you may not be aware of, but some of it's other stuff that we've released already that you should be aware of. So CHAs are not required to enter AHAVs into HMIS. However, if families who receive these vouchers are receiving services from programs that are required to use HMIS, then those clients are entered into HMIS projects that are receiving those services. So, for example, if a family is getting a voucher and they're receiving case management services through ESGCV, that family must be added to the ESGCV project in HMIS. Additionally, per the notice, EHVS, if they are receiving a referral from the COC's coordinated entry system, then the COC must have a way of recording that referral in the system. And so that's what you see in the updated data standards. There's a way to then manage that referral and note it in the system. And, while obviously there's a kind of, and you'll hear more about this soon, those need to be programmed into the HMIS. HUD is encouraging communities to be thinking about how that information is going to be noted in the system and preparing communities to be able to start noting and gathering that information, and also working with the programs, the EHV programs, so they're aware of those referrals. Also, you'll want to be thinking from the COC side of how you're going to report that information. So you can run that information and track the number of referrals. And you may also you may be interested in knowing, characteristics around those referrals, like race, ethnicity, and gender. And with regard to the HIC in 2022, there's no final decision on this, but it is probably likely that those would be included in the HIC because obviously those units are dedicated to people experiencing homelessness. So likely it'll be in the HIC, but again, this has not been determined. And for the home ARP, this has not been determined as needing to be in HMIS. However, recipients and sub-recipients will likely use HMIS, at least some of them will likely use HMIS, and so we want to be able to support them if they use HMIS to record information. So be thinking about that as an HMIS system administrator. So if you have programs in your community that want to do that kind of recording, what can we do to help them do that? There's a link up there for the Public Housing Authority Data Sharing Agreement. That's a document that was created a while back ago, and that may be very helpful to you. So that's all of the information I have right now. There'll be more information that will be released. There will be an FAQ that's going to come out that kind of captures some of the information that I first described, and that should be released soon, so you'll have more information, more detailed information on this. Last thing I want to share with you is the Data Analytics on Demand course. We're very excited. This is a long time coming. This is for folks that want to get educated around how to do data analytics. You only have to have basic knowledge about the HMIS data standards, the ability to either pull a comma-separated value file from the HMIS or someone being able to pull that for you, and how to enter data into Excel and navigate with it. It's open to anyone who's interested in doing analysis, interpretation, and communicating with HMIS data. It's very cool. It's online. I'm very excited about it. And we're going to have a lot more information coming out about this soon, but I just wanted to give you guys a heads up. So I will turn it over. I don't know if we may have some questions. Obviously, I can't see. But I'm happy to turn it over.
Hi, this is Joyce. Of course, my phone went unmuted. Hi, sorry, Joyce. I just couldn't get my phone unmuted. So Joyce is going to go next. I just want to see if there are any questions specifically for Fran that we want to
there was a lot of love for the NHSDC conference being an actual in-person conference, so that was seemingly well received. But there was a question if there's going to be a virtual option for the next conference as well as the in-person option.
So for the in-person conferences prior to COVID, HUD had started doing some live streaming of some of the sessions. We will look to do that again. We don't have anything concrete at this point, but that if we can, we will do that.
And there was a question on EHV and if they were going to be required in HMS or why they are not required to be in HMIS.
So I was answering a couple of those. So the EHV referral, like referral to an EHV voucher, is in the new data standards. We'll go over those in a little bit. You can record the referral in your CE event. The actual, housing project that for the EHV isn't necessarily required to be in HMIS. There's no requirement for that at this time. And Fran, I didn't quite hear you. I think you were saying that there might be still some discussion about that, but they're traditionally HCV, right? Housing choice vouchers. It's just a special designation of those for currently homeless or formerly homeless. The EHV vouchers are, but housing choice vouchers aren't required to be in HMIS either. There's a possibility, but not a requirement. So if you figure out locally that that's something you want to add to your data collection, you can, but it's not a requirement. Is that correct still, Fran?
Yeah, that's correct. That's absolutely correct. And it's, it's following the same model where we absolutely are not going to require that. That would be too heavy of a lift. And yeah, they are not required to enter into HMIS directly.
So the only required thing is if you have coordinated entry, supportive service only, COC funded, coordinated entry services only, right? You're required to use HMIS for your CE APR, and as of October 1, you can record EHV referrals in your CE process that are made as of October 1.
Yes, and if you are, right, and if you're using services that are supporting those vouchers, of course, those services, you know, if they're a ESG, COC, ESG, CB service, those of course are, those individuals are recorded in HMIS through those programs.
So the funding source of the service might have HMIS requirements, like COC,
Yeah.
ESG. So with that, Brian, was that it, or is there any more?
I think we're okay to move on now, just in the interest of how much time we have left.
Okay. Joyce is an Apt Associate, Senior Associate here at Apt Associates, and is here to present you and Stella together again. Joyce, take it away.
Thanks, Mary. So we presented a lot of this material at NHSDC, but I'm hoping to make sure that we reach everybody. We wanted to just quickly go through the Stella basics and talk about what's new this year. So Stella Performance is a module in HDX 2.0, and it visualizes your LSA data to help COCs get better insight into system performance analysis. It is similar to the system performance measures, but somewhat different. There's a document on HUD Exchange which explains the differences, but Stella Performance is intended to help you be able to better understand how your system is serving people and develop performance improvement strategies. To access Stella, you need an HDX 2.0 account if you don't know how, or if you don't know if you have an account, if you've gotten your password. I imagine all of you are HDX 2.0 devoted users, and this is not needed, but you can go ahead and submit an AAQ if you need help getting into HDX 2.0. So Stella Performance is reporting information about households. It's household level data. There's no personally identifying information in Stella Performance or the LSA, and it reports on the projects that are included in the LSA. So when you think about what's there, just think about what's in your LSA. And you have the ability, we'll get to all of your official LSA confirmed data sets have been Stellavized, but you can upload other local LSA reports for a different time period or for a region in your COC, and then you can Stellavize those data sets so you can look at visualizations for data, different data than the official data set. And Stella's available now for your 2019 and 2020 official submissions. We batch Stellavized it, which just means that we ran the process to convert the data sets into the Stella Performance, so you don't have to take that step. And now when you go into HDX 2.0, these files are available to you to just start reviewing in Stella Performance. And my understanding is that this is the plan from now on, that your official data sets will be Stellavized after submission. And I already mentioned that the goal of having Stella Performance is to help COCs get past that analysis step and get to the thinking about performance improvement and what kind of strategies they need to develop to, say, reduce length of time homeless for families or increase access to permanent housing. Whatever it is, Stella helps you start identifying areas of your system to target for improvement. And I want to mention that there is now a system performance improvement toolkit that is either on HUD Exchange or is about to be uploaded to HUD Exchange, which starts from Stella Performance and then talks about other data you might want to look at in your system, and then walks you through the performance improvement strategy process. Okay, so now I want to screen share. And Melissa, tell me when, or show me. Okay. So we are very quickly, because there's not a lot of time, going to look at a sample data set in Stella Performance. This is data that is anonymized, detached from the LSA, but gives us the ability to share it with people like you and use it in products and other technical assistance engagements. So Stella Performance starts with understanding how many people were served in the homeless system and the high-level performance on the three main measures in the system performance measures: average days homeless, exits to permanent housing, and returns after exits to permanent destinations. And this returns measure is on returns within 6 months of exit to permanent housing. There is a lot more detail under each of these measures in these tabs up here at the top. We will not have time to go into them all, but it really, Stella lets you filter and drill down into a lot of detail about these measures. So these are high-level measures for all households in your system, but Stella has three main household types that the data is broken down into: adult-only households, which are households without minor children. It may be one or more adults together, adult and child households, and then child-only households. So the three main household types. There are other household types within these, but most of the measures have this rolled up as the first introduction. And then exits by household type. Again, this is focusing on permanent destinations, but there's detail about temporary and unknown. And then returns by household type. Again, this is within 6 months of exit to permanent housing. So one feature that's new this year, because now we have 3 years of data in HDX 2.0, is we're able to share trend data for households with days homeless. So this is looking at the number of households that had at least one day in a project where there are days homeless counted for each of the 3 years that are in HDX 2.0, and every year as we add more data, the oldest year will drop off, and you'll have these trends, 3-year trends available to you in Stella Performance. And then we also have days homeless trends by household type with a lot of detail about the different households by year here. And whoops, I'll stop hovering over that. But anyway, this again is only available in the 2020 data set. Previously, when you only had 2018 data, we had suppressed these charts because we needed to have more data sets to be able to show you trends. The exits to permanent destinations and returns trends were already here because we had to capture previous year exits to be able to provide return data for 6, 12, and 24 months. And so that information was already available to display as trends data. One newish feature that was created in response to people's requests is that there's now a print all feature. And this, Stella has many, many charts, and you can potentially print all of those charts to share them in your community, or you can filter all of the charts and choose which ones you want to look at, say days homeless, and you can choose which one. You can also filter this by the different household types. And, you know, say you want to print all the adult and child, and you're particularly interested in adult and child households with with 3 or more children, or by race and ethnicity, you can filter the print all so that what you're selecting is really focused on one household type and population group. So I know I'm rushing through this, but I want to focus on one of the key concepts in Stella Performance that really is an important organizing principle for both understanding how your system is serving people and for the Stella modeling module that we're working on right now that should be available at the end of this year, early next year. And this concept is the idea of pathways. that most people are served by combinations of project types in their system. And understanding how these combination of project types are performing on how long people are homeless, how many exit to permanent housing, how many are returning within 6 months of an exit or even longer. These are important pieces of information for performance improvement. So again, this is a pathway by days homeless chart, and this is the point of housing. So all of this purple on the left side are days homeless. And the thing about pathways is it's important to understand what portion of the household, in this case, this is all households in the system. In this COC, there was about 10,000 households in the system who had any time homeless during the reporting year. And 50% of those households were served only in shelter. And on average, they were in shelter 36 days. But here, let's see here. So shelter plus rapid rehousing, 16% of the households were served in a pathway that included both shelter and rapid rehousing. And on average, they were homeless 73 days, including 57 days in shelter and 16 days enrolled in a rapid rehousing program before they had a move-in date. So they were someplace else in the system, in a shelter that's not entering data into HMIS, or unsheltered, and they were enrolled in the program before a housing move-in date. So all of this information by pathway helps you really understand how your system is performing. And if you think about coordinated entry, it's really recommending pathways to serve people. And you can think about, how well these reflect the kinds of interventions that your assessment is recommending for people. A couple of additional features, you can select long stayers here. Let's see, I'm clicking the box and it's taking a little bit to respond. But anyway, the long stayers are people who are homeless for 180 days or more. Okay, here we go. So if we're looking at the 50% of households who were in shelter, only 1% were long stayers. So that's somebody who had 180 days homeless or more in the reporting period. But you can look at some of these other pathways, like rapid rehousing plus PSH. Only 1% of households use both of those project types, but 13% of them were long stayers. So this is just another layer of information. Can't tell how I'm doing on time. Checking in. I think I have a little more time, so I'm going to quickly go to demographics just to point out the information that's available. This is available for households and people served in the homeless system, including those served in PSH during the report period. So you can look at household type, and you can also look at where in the system they were served in, including you can look at any project type. And we have gender, age, race, and ethnicity, and you can look at, here in this particular COC, there 77% of the people served are white, and that's in shelter and transitional housing. But if you want to look at permanent supportive housing, which includes people who've been in permanent supportive housing, they were placed in permanent supportive housing before the reporting year, and they've spent the whole year in permanent supportive housing. You can see it's 81% in permanent supportive housing. So this is the kind of analysis that Stella P can help you do of how your system is serving people of different race and ethnicities. They'll have household composition, veteran status, CV, chronic and disabling condition, including information about people who may have either a disabling condition or time homeless, which might lead them towards becoming chronically homeless. So you have a sense of, where you might want to be trying to target to reduce people becoming chronically homeless. Geography, prior living situation. So all of this information is available by project, and then you can compare project types, so it gives you a chance to do what I just did by race and ethnicity, looking at different project types. So I think I am talking really fast, and instead of going into this comparison, I just want to show you the coolest graphic, which is like the wrap-up graphic, which shows you all of the measures at once. It gives you an overview of the pathways, and you can filter it by household type. And this is our system map. So this is showing how many people were served, had a day homeless in the reporting period, and then what percent went to different project types, and the pathways split up among the project types. And then you see from the different project types, the percent exiting to permanent housing, and then the overall percentage for the COC of people exiting, the percent that exited the permanent housing, and then the returns within 6 months. And if you wanted to filter this information, we just looked at, you can just look at one pathway and see the performance measure of shelter plus rapid rehousing across all three of these measures. It gives you a good summary of this part of your system, and then if you wanted to say, well, let's see how families in shelter and rapid rehousing are doing, 89% of them are exiting to housing, and they were homeless for 83 days on average before moving into housing, and 3% returned within 6 months of exiting to permanent housing. So it's a good summary of your system once you're able to, kind of go through and everybody understands the different measures. This is a good way to look at all of the measures combined. So I'm going to pause and see if there are questions.
Thanks, Joyce. That was great. Jesse, I think we have time for like 1 or 2 questions if you think there are any to verbally talk about.
Yeah, I think something that would be helpful to talk about and something that we hear about a lot is, why isn't this project type or that project type included in Stella, and, what are kind of the plans for the future? So to the extent that you could talk about that a little bit, Joyce, that would be helpful.
Right. Well, when Stella came out, there was a lot of discussion about why street outreach isn't in, because obviously it's big universities who are not captured currently in the LSA. So street outreach is really not a very standardized project, and the data collection is spotty and, focused on different things. So there was a decision not to include street outreach data. Now, some people are served at some point in shelter and also in street outreach. If they had a day in shelter, they're counted in this data. But I think the goal would be, if we can get to a point of more standardized street outreach data, to have it in LSA. But the other thing I would say is there's a lot of interest in putting coordinated entry data into the LSA and then into Stella P. Obviously, that's also a couple of years out. There's a lot to learn about that. Coordinated entry data elements aren't required for everybody, but it would give you a lot of insight into people who are in projects that aren't participating in HMIS, say a large shelter, but the people in the shelter were assessed. You would be able to have insight into their path through the system. Many of the people in that shelter may go on to a housing project, and then that enrollment would be captured here. But I think as we try to expand the data that the LSA covers, so it is a more complete picture of your system, that's one of the areas that there's interest in doing. I think the other area is other permanent housing, and that is also a not very standardized project type, but as continuums think about emergency housing vouchers, there's home money that might create units, as continuums get beyond the basic project types, I think, we want to be able to reflect them here in Stella P in the future.
That's helpful, thanks. I think one more question. Can you speak to the usability of the Stella Analytics when a data set is for less or more than a single year? So if you were to expand that reporting period, are there implications for how the measures work?
Well, certainly the returns would be complicated by that, I believe, because the returns are really, there's a reference point for the returns. That would be a great thing to submit in the AAQ, and then we can think through which of the measures might be really, you would have to spend more time on them. But yeah, that's a really good question.
Great, thank you.
And I saw a question here about, is there national data in Stella-P? So there is not national data, although there's a lot of interest in it, but the LSA is COC by COC. There are some large HMIS implementations could potentially run an LSA for multiple COCs, if everybody agreed, and you could upload that into Stella-P and see the performance across multiple COCs for an HMIS implementation that had all that data and could do that. But there is no way to have the LSA combined into a national data set that can be visualized. So at this point, that is not available, although I know there's a lot of interest in it.
All right. Thank you, Joy, so much for this Stella demo. Melissa, if we want to go back to our slide deck. Thanks, Jesse and Brian and Meredith, for keeping the questions answered. We are going to shift gears now over to the fiscal year 2022 data standards. So Meredith, can you forward your slides and take it from here?
I sure can. Thanks, everyone. Before I hop into data standards, just really quickly, I want to say one thing. I saw this question come up in the chat box, and I know it's come up in some other contexts as well, just questioning when your SAGE AAQs will be responded to. I just wanted to let you know, Fran was going to mention this earlier, but her technical issues, whatever. Those issues should be resolved very soon. HUD anticipates getting the AAQ desk back up and running, getting the support back up and running for SAGE very soon. So thank you for your patience. Big apologies for the inconvenience, but we will get those resolved very soon. Okay, so jumping in then to FY 2022 data standards. I want to preface this by saying we have talked about some of this before on previous calls. We talked about it in March. Mary and some HUD folks, I believe, did a really great data standards presentation at NHSDC. We have the link in the resources, I believe. We'll make sure to share that with you. You can get a little more detail, a little more information through that session. So some of these pieces I'm going to skip through kind of quickly because there haven't been many changes since the last time we talked, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for the rest of our content. So just really quickly here in front of you, you will see the link to the HMIS data standards resources. Hopefully you all are aware. We posted the data standards interactive tool, the dictionary, the manual. All of those were posted in April, I believe, end of April, beginning of May, for you to review. As a reminder, these data standards go into effect on October 1st, 2021. So when you go look at that website on the HUD Exchange, you're going to continue to see the 2020 resources because those are the data standards that are in effect through the end of September. So we don't want to, cause any confusion and people wonder which ones start when. So yeah, those are both out there. There are a number of resources still under development that will be coming very soon. So there's an XML schema, there's mapping guidance for the vendors, there is back data entry requirements guidance for all of you system administrators. There is a update to the reporting glossary that will be forthcoming, as well as updates to the programming specifications. I don't believe there are anticipated to be massive restructuring of any of these reports, but really just mostly updating for these new data standards. So let's talk through a couple of the changes that you will see in the data standards materials. This first page here is really sort of just clarifications that we tried to make in some of the guidance. There were places where the manual had some information that probably was more appropriate to be in the dictionary for the vendors since that's what they use to program from. So some of this is existing information. It's just maybe moved somewhere else or clarified a little bit depending on the audience. So we specified within the guidance that the date of birth response options of don't know, refuse, and missing are not allowed to be with any other option. So if you have a full date of birth recorded, you cannot also say that you have a missing date of birth. So sort of logical, but needed to be said. There also was some confusion about the requirements for auto exit functionality. It is still not required for a software to have auto exit functionality. HUD is not saying vendors must be able to do that. However, HUD knows that there are several vendors that do offer that functionality, and so we needed to tighten up the rules around when those auto exits are occurring, what the exit date should actually be set to for those clients who are auto exited. So that's in there. We also get a lot of questions about aging into adulthood, so how to collect information when someone turns 18 in the project for income and benefits, health insurance, you know, those different pieces that are required as you age into adulthood. So we added a little bit of clarification to the guidance there. We also found that some reports or systems were set up in such a way that housing move-in dates, there were situations where more than one housing move-in date was occurring within a particular enrollment. So we offered some additional guidance there to really specify that there is only one housing move-in date, and it has to be between the project start and the project exit. So a little bit there. There was some inconsistency in the HOPWA data elements around who the data was collected about. So we didn't really change, the logic there. We just made it all read the same way because it really was being collected on the same group of people, just said in different ways, and it was a little confusing. And then there also was an update with pregnancy status. Historically, the guidance said to only to limit pregnancy status to people who identified as female. That has been removed so that there are more options for people who identify with different genders to be able to indicate if they are pregnant. So then moving into some of the actual changes that you will probably see on your screen that will require potentially some data collection changes here. In the PDDEs and the project descriptor data elements, we've added a couple of different pieces. In the project information, there is a new field to determine if something is a HOPWA-funded medically assisted living facility. In the manual specifically, we added, or I think we took away some guidance there. So we updated the language around naming conventions for projects. I think in the past it said that the project name was required to match grant agreements. That has been backed off a little bit though in this guidance. What we're really looking for, and I know you've heard me or someone from our office really, maybe even on the SAGE desk, you've heard lots of feedback from project names not working correctly, like not matching what ESG recipients or COC recipients were indicating in their reports. There was just a fair amount of confusion around project names. So I just wanted to pause on that for a second and explain why we made that change. There is a lot of confusion when ESG-CV, I think, really brought it to light. When the ESG recipient calls a project one thing and the HMIS has set up a project as something different in the HMIS. And often what we see when we see that data come in through Q4 of the different reports that we see come in through SAGE, we see 6 different projects called ESG-RRH, ESG-RRH, ESG-RRH. And the problem that we're running into and the questions that we're getting from ESG recipients and from other folks that are looking at this data, what's the difference between these projects? How do you know which project is which? How do I know as the recipient, if I'm a state recipient and I funded 4 different Salvation Armies for rapid rehousing, they're having a hard time understanding what they're looking at. And they're getting questions when they want to end a particular project. They want to end their Salvation Army rapid rehousing project because the grant ended. They don't know which one to pick when they're closing it out in SAGE. So there was just a lot of confusion around the project names. And then we would hear back from the HMIS lead that it was required to be a certain thing. And then the ESG recipient was saying, well, no, it's not required to be a certain thing. So we wanted to take that language out. We wanted to make it clearer in the manual that it would be great if it is consistent with the grant agreement, but more importantly, that it's consistent across multiple sort of, I don't remember how we said this exactly, but it should be consistent across the different funding sources. So I'm not saying that super clearly, and I apologize for that, but I think the point is that there is not a required naming convention, but you are strongly encouraged to use a naming convention that makes sense both to you as the HMIS leads, but also to the agencies and the others that are using those project names and using the HMIS data. So I'll leave it at that, but please, if there are questions about that, submit an AAQ and we can dig into that a little bit more. There's also, in the PDBEs, we added some new funding sources. Since the last time we talked, I think we've added 3 more, maybe 2 more. We added the home ARP and we added the EHV vouchers that we've spent so long talking about already today. But those are 2 new funding sources. Again, those are not required to be in HMIS, but we did want them to be available as funding source options if you chose to put them in your HMIS. Moving on to race and ethnicity, we did not change anything since we last talked on race and ethnicity, I don't believe. You can see the highlighted pieces here where we have made some language changes. These are just field label changes. They are not logic changes, simply just what's displayed on the screen. It's a little hard to see, I'm sorry. We did make some gender changes though since the last time we had this group all together. We got a lot of feedback from folks on this call, which was very much appreciated. We continue to receive feedback from our federal partners and from the group that was convened that were experts on the topic, and the decision was made to stick with the words female and male for the gender. If you recall, we had toyed with the idea of saying man or woman, boy, girl. There were a number of different options that were vetted, and ultimately the decision was to keep that as female and male. There is a new response option for a gender other than singularly female or male. We are getting rid of the previous option that was gender nonconforming. So we will be using this response option instead. There is a singular transgender option. There is a new questioning option. The really important piece here is that clients can pick as many as are applicable to them. So if a person identifies as a female and as transgender, they would indicate both of those response options. I also want to say, and I think we talked about this last time too, there is a really strong desire to improve this data element and to make more significant and substantial changes to this particular element. That can't happen in a meaningful and adequate way in such a short period of time. So HUD and their federal partners, lots of different stakeholders here have talked about beginning those conversations now and moving that conversation ahead now so that we don't get to a point where time runs out and we're not able to make the changes that need to be made here to best capture the information that is needed. In the mental health and substance use data elements, we just updated some language in there, took out the terms abuse instead of saying mental health, and I think we had mental health problem before we took out problem. So we have use instead of abuse. So you'll see those there. In the coordinated entry event, there are 3 new response options. Last time we talked, there was only 1, but we have added EHV and housing stability vouchers. We also, updated some of the logic then within that data element around if a referral was made to one of those voucher programs, was it successful? So we'll be measuring that information as part of coordinated entry. Sorry, my screen froze there for a second. Okay, well-being, I do believe we talked about the well-being data element. So that is a new element. There is also the addition of the collection of the R7 general health status. There was a lot of feedback here from, again, this group and other stakeholders that were reviewing these data elements. Since the last time we talked, HUD made the change to apply this data element only to permanent supportive housing projects. I know that they're anxious to learn more from those particular projects and then explore the potential for expanding the rollout of it or updating it as needed in the next data standards update. The new moving on assistance provided data element, this was restructured since the last time we talked. This is now, it is recorded each time moving on assistance is provided, as opposed to something that is collected at start and again at exit. It is collected only as of an update and only if that assistance is actually provided. So you would select the date that it was provided and then the actual assistance that was provided. The youth education status, I don't believe there was any change since we talked there. That is the new data element that is applicable to YHDP funded projects. W3 medical assistance is a new data element, or new field within the data element, I'm sorry, for Ryan White funded medical or dental assistance. There was no change since our last call there. Same with W6, which is a new data element. V3, which is the financial assistance data element, no changes since we last talked. There are those 2 new responses, and I believe we eliminated one response and combined it with general housing stability assistance. So same changes we discussed previously. The V7 data element, you'll actually see what you see on your screen, depending on how close you've read the manual or dictionary, is slightly different than what is currently posted online. There will be a revision to the dictionary and manual posted very soon. There was a field in there that the VA wanted to have removed. So what was previously dependent A, which was related to being referred to coordinated entry, I believe, that is gone. So we had to renumber these response options. Otherwise, the data element has stayed the same. It's just the elimination of what was dependency A is gone. So now we have a new set of options. Really, it's just been renumbering them since we last talked. As a long data element, those are all the pieces to it. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to put it back on the screen, though. Is there anything we need to talk through, or Mary, are you ready to take it on to talk through the next part?
I can take it on and talk through the next part, sure, and also trying to think what data element questions I answered. I think I shared everything with everyone that came in about just a few specifics here and there, like C1 and C2 are for HUD-funded PSH projects, not all PSH projects. Those are HUD-funded ones.
COC funded specifically, yeah.
COC funded, yeah, sorry. COC funded. Yeah, no, I think we're good, but I'm sure some will come in as we kind of anticipate, so we have a half hour left on our call. I'm not sure that we'll go that long, but we anticipate that this next conversation will generate a lot of questions. And we also have William joined us on the phone, William Snow from HUD, in case we want to go back to some EHV discussions, questions that came in about requirements for EHV reporting and recording, et cetera. So let me go into this conversation that we have lined up next, which is just to start orienting you to, as HMIS leads, to the expectations around data entry for fiscal year 2022 HMIS data standards. And we know, again, that this is going to probably generate more questions than it answers for you, but we want to get the conversation started because it is complicated. It can get really confusing, and it's hard to know who's assigned to do what. But here's the 3 main points that I'll keep trying to circle back to as we get into this discussion. Mapping from fiscal year 2020 data standards to fiscal year 2022 data standards is provided to your vendors. The vendors are responsible for mapping data from old standards to new standards. Back entry data collection for brand new elements, brand new fields, brand new responses, right? For clients where the project start date is before October 1 and they're still going, they're in your program this year and they're carrying over into the next fiscal year, those back entry data collection requirements are usually something that you'll need to think through as you think about the approaching October 1 deadline. So data that exists now will get mapped if it's an element that's changed. If it's like gender is a great example of that, and our next slide is going to look at the gender elements in terms of mapping. But for something that's new, that's maybe now a part of like the COC PSH project, has new data elements, and now that those are going to be in HMIS as of October 1, you have active clients in your system as of October 1 in PSH projects. They won't have that element collected yet because it doesn't exist yet. So when it does exist in your screens and clients are active in the projects that require that data, it's likely that you need to think through the effort of back data entry. For anyone that starts new in your projects as of October 1 and forward, that's just, you're under the new data standards. There's no back data entry needed. And in some cases, HUD might go through, or the federal partner to who the element applies might go through and say, you know what, even though this one is brand new and we know people are active in this project, we're not going to require back entry on that data element. It's just from this date going forward. So that possibly could happen too. So all of these scenarios, and it's element by element, response by response, right, where things have changed, we map out for you what's going to be covered in the vendor mapping that's going to occur prior to October 1, what grantees and data entry folks need to think about going back and collecting that's new as of October 1 for any active client that's still in the program as of that day, and what elements just start afresh. They begin October 1 no matter the client situation, right, and whether they were in the project before it started or not. So I am now going to kind of try and visually represent those three things, and you can expect before here too long, probably within the next week, a mapping document. If you look back at the, not a mapping document, a data entry for fiscal year 2022 HMIS data standards document. If you look at the fiscal year 2020 data standards documents that are on HUD Exchange, you'll see that we did this data entry kind of document last time around, 2 years ago, and we'll do it again for you. And 2 years ago, there was the vendor mapping document available. That'll be done again too. So those things that you can expect that are pretty, we do the same thing with each data standard change. This is just one of those things. Some folks on this call and in this field are new and haven't been through a data standard change before, so we just wanted to make sure we're covering the basics of what you can expect, knowing that it's going to get detailed as we get closer to the October 1 date. So first, a mapping example, right? So right now, as of today and all the way up until September 30, the screens in your software, in your HMIS locally, say for gender, female, male, trans male, gender nonconforming, and client doesn't know, client refused, data not collected. Beginning October 1, we see in our local screens, the options are female, male, a gender not singularly female or male, transgender questioning, doesn't know, refused, data not collected. And the mapping document that the vendors get, if the data was collected prior to October 1, it was under that old data standard, that data gets mapped over to the new data standards. And it happens whether the client's active or not active or, you know, old, new, whatever. Like there is data in HMIS right now, and the mapping that the vendors do on the back end for you, per HUD's instructions on this, will take the data that was collected under old data standards and put it into the format of the new data standards. It's just done. And you can kind of see evidence of that if you think back to, you know, we've had how many, 3 data standard changes since like 2014, right? But a PSH client who's in your project right now still, since 2014, you can get updated information on that PSH client. If they're active and they stuck around and I still have to report on them, the programming that you use to pull that client out is on whatever the new current standard is, and that data comes in. Even though it's old data, it was mapped to new data standards each and every time there was a data standard change. So that is one of the three things you can expect, right? That the vendors will get a document that tells them how to take, where it's possible, take what exists now and put it into the right place when October 1 starts. And then your screens will line up with what the October 1 data standards are, and data that you collected under the old standard matches up to that too. What else happens is there might be brand new stuff that there's no way to map it, right? So number 2 on our list of things to think about is we're going to get to October 1, and there's going to be a bunch of new data standards that we haven't even seen before, like C1, like C2, like C3, like W6, like the V7 changes, and even within the elements that we have, like 4.20 and 3.06, not 3.0, yeah, 4.20, like there's the EHV referral. That's a new option in that coordinated entry data standard. So if you think about everything that's new as of October 1, there's information in the screen to collect, and I might have clients in my projects that require the collection of that data. For the most part, that data will be blank until you fill it in. There is no way to take data that didn't exist before and map it to the new data standards. So that's kind of the easy way to think about what is going to be the vendor's responsibility versus what's going to be your responsibility with your active clients as of October 1. There are times when HUD says, we don't need to get back data collected. You know, we're going to define all that by that data entry requirement document that'll go up on HUD Exchange soon. And if you all remember, for those that you were around, coordinated entry data elements worked that way, right? When we rolled out 4.19 and 4.20 back in October 1, 2019, almost 2 years ago, we said it's not required to go back in time, even if clients are active, even if you're running a CE project, even if clients are active in your CE project, don't worry about going back, just start from this day and go forward. So there's going to be different rules for different elements. There's going to be different responsibilities depending on the type of data element it is and what the data and what the change was. And we just want you to be kind of prepared that there's a date coming up in which things are going to change, and there's stuff to do, and there might be data to think about how to collect and start thinking about that now. I think that is what I want to say, unless Meredith or Jesse or Brian, there's like specific questions or confusion to clear up.
I don't think there's necessarily confusion that I'm seeing come through. There are still a few questions, though, about some of the data elements, if we could just tackle those really quickly.
Absolutely.
One was around if a client identifies as transgender, they would have to also respond male or female if we or they wanted that level of extra data. I think the important part here is you're going to go on client self-report. It is what the client reports to the person who is collecting the data. So if they identify as female and transgender, then you would select female and transgender. There is not to be an assumption made by the person collecting the data. It is what the client reports their gender to be. And it can be as many of those options as they choose to select. And I believe there's a little more guidance in the manual on this particular topic as well. So we would encourage you to go check out the manual for additional information there. There's also a question about how the new universal data elements get put into their HMIS. Do they have to request it, or does the vendor automatically do it? Oh, I just now see that Brian answered that. But vendors should have a plan for implementing these changes in your software. It should be something that is agreed upon by you and your vendor in your contracts. But the expectation is that the vendor does this as part of their annual update, or biannual at this point. We also have the question, and I know, Jesse, you've answered it, but I'm going to say it out loud because it's come in a couple of different times here. What's the difference between questioning and client doesn't know in the gender data element?
I could read it right from the manual if you want, Jesse. Oh, did you cut and paste this?
That'd be great. Yep, that's where I pulled it from. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and of course, I lost it. Oh, okay. So questioning is about exploring one's gender identity. Client doesn't know should only be selected when a client does not know their gender from the options available, including questioning. So questioning is about exploring one's gender identity. They're kind of in the process, active in the process of questioning, but client doesn't know is an option that is available only after the options are listed and available for the client to choose from, including the option in questioning.
Kind of a similar question to follow up on that. We've got a question here that, so what's the difference between questioning and not singular? So having a non-singular gender identity is a very specific identity. It's not that somebody isn't sure or they wonder if it might be different than what they initially thought their gender identity was. Like, it is a place that someone arrives at in terms of how they identify. So that would be the difference between questioning and the non-singular option.
And again, we're going to be working towards fiscal year 2024 data standard changes that are much larger than the change you see here in gender, and may include like dependency options and a larger list of options. There will be exploration done to move forward with an inclusive as possible list of gender options.
There's a question in here. Mary, did you want to go on with more content, or do you want to keep doing questions? We could take this offline.
There is no more content. Unless we want to go back to a slide, we've like run out of content slides.
Was William going to add anything additional? I wasn't sure if he was, or just answering questions.
I wasn't sure on that either. We'll let William and Fran jump in. But if you have a data standard question, we could keep going on that until they interrupt us.
Well, my question is, I don't know if you can see Janelle's question. What are users meant to do in relation to follow-up or data tracking in regards to the new data elements for PSH clients? I think the answer is you will find that out in the back data entry guidance. I just wanted to say that out loud because I'm not sure if I'm totally following the question. But yes, we will provide you with information, with instructions for what data needs to be updated, or what, because I think there's going to be, for like a PSH client, there's probably a few different situations here. There may be cause to go in like on the 1st or soon thereafter and go update something, or it may just be that you now have to collect something at annual assessment that you weren't collecting previously, right? Like you don't have to go in and change something. You would just have to go in and start collecting whatever it may be, or like moving on assistance, you would just start collecting that when it occurred.
A co-moderator
Mary,
has joined the conference.
We have a question about why do the federal partners need to know whether a client is questioning or non-binary? So I think those are two different sort of questions. I'm going to break it up. So first of all, in terms of whether somebody identifies as non-binary, those folks are, I think, at a higher risk to experience discrimination. From a research standpoint, the federal partners are interested in understanding how people with maybe minority gender identities are experiencing the homeless system, and to make sure that their needs are being met. And so we need folks to be able to, claim that identity and share that with us if that's something that they want to do. And then in terms of questioning, essentially that is an opportunity for folks to not have to claim an identity if they don't currently identify with any of those terms, because they're in this active process of really searching and reflecting on that. So we want to make sure that people have options that reflect really where they're at in their identity. And for the same purpose of, are people who are, questioning their identity, I could see that being an issue in terms of accessing a single gender shelter, right? If you only have single gender shelters where you are and you're currently questioning, like, are you having a problem with accessing somewhere to stay for the night? So those are some of the reasons why we're asking this information. Hopefully that answers your question. Thanks.
Jesse, you're getting a lot of compliments for the answers that you're providing too, so thanks. William, I know you were just made a presenter with us, or we can maybe hear your voice, and I think a few people really want to hear HUD's answer to why the new PSH questions, well-being in particular, I think. Do you or Fran want to hop on and give a verbal response to that?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yes, happy to. And I want to thank Jesse for your response to the last questions. Those are really, really important to us. So I just can't emphasize enough. And there are implications as to how services happen that we need to take into account on the gender side as well as on race and ethnicity. So very, very important to us, and Jesse explained it really well. Let me touch on American Rescue Plan programs for a second. So home is going to have a lot of money tied to it. Some of that money is going to go into tenant-based rental assistance, probably. Some of it may go into services, and those programs would be targeted for those people experiencing homelessness. We believe the vast majority of that funding is probably going to go to new units, which is fantastic. If you ask me what I want and what most of us want on the SNAP side, you don't have any money to create units, so spend your home dollars on creating units. So we'll just say that. It has data implications, though. So if they collect data or they set up TBRA programs through this home funding, yes, we're going to expect you to report on the housing inventory count, right? That was a question in there. But I am not expecting that it will be a requirement to participate in HMIS. We've had this discussion with the program office. We've talked about it a lot. They actually have a very, very low threshold on how they collect data. And so they're likely not going to throw in a whole new data collection regime that greatly enhances what they have, but they're just not going to require it. So we're not anticipating a required HMIS participation for home programs, at least not for the TBRA program. What we are expecting, though, is, again, the partnership and, again, probably the housing inventory count. We still need to think about the implications of HMIS bed coverage for that, and that kind of rolls also into the home-funded EHV or Emergency Housing Voucher Program. We know that's a big one. We had a lot of conversations about HMIS on that. They probably sounded a lot like what you would expect to hear if we were talking about VASH or other VA programs where there's an existing data collection system. People are not excited about having double data entry or even the idea of creating like an import-export requirement. We had the discussion. We were not successful in getting that requirement. We are still investigating whether or not HMIS-related costs are going to be eligible under EHV because that door is not closed yet. We are trying to educate them on, look, if you're going to require the use of coordinated entry, the next thing you're going to do is ask that each PHA have the number of referrals that come from CES. That's natural. That's going to happen. Well, that doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from a data system. More often than not, it comes from HMIS, which means you're going to need an HMIS lead to create a report of referrals to EHV from data element 4.20 in your HMIS and the corollary data element in your coordinated entry database if it's separate. So there's a cost creating a report, running the report, giving the report, especially considering how frequently they may want to do that, right? They may want it monthly. So again, we've expressed these costs to them, and the door has not been closed on whether or not we can get some reimbursement for that. But we have said that. That's one layer of HMIS as it relates to EHV. The other obvious one is, well, what about entering the program itself in HMIS, right? Again, take the VASH example, entering it into the program in HMIS. That too was shot down, again, largely because that is the data that is collected by the program or the PHA already. We even talked about that idea of import-export requirements. Again, no go on that. However, so that translates into COCs cannot require a PHA to enter that data into HMIS. You will not have that ability. However, you can negotiate that locally. It's a good time to educate them on the cost of running HMIS. And again, that may be an eligible cost, some of the data collection aspects of it. We're investigating that. Feel free to send an AAQ on that, by the way. That doesn't hurt. It helps continue to show the need for that element. So again, the summary is we know there's work on your end. We know that HMIS, whether you like it or not, is going to come into play. We can't require HMIS for the ARP programs, but we've talked about the costs associated with the work you do being eligible, and we're hoping to be successful in that regard. So that's where we are with the EHV and the HICS. Again, the HICS is, it will likely be required. I think the real question is, will we score based on your EHV programs as to whether or not they're participating in HMIS? We have the ability to say we'll remove those from your bed coverage calculation. We'll investigate that. It certainly has lots of implications, so we'll see what we can do and what makes sense. Let me turn now to the other piece on well-being. So we definitely recognize this is different than how we do almost all the data elements in HMIS. Those elements are largely focused on identification and outcomes, and often objective-based. Where did you come from? Yeah, there might be some subjectivity to that, but really it's pretty objective, right? You came from a house situation or a not-house situation. What this element obviously introduces is this principle of client-level perspective and voice. And we don't know that this is the best way to approach it, but we're going to attempt it. So with permanent supportive housing projects only, we do want to know what the client perspective is. These questions are intended to get at quality of life, right? Has their experience going from whatever terrible situation they were before improved as a result of going in your program? That's the idea. And yes, there are a lot of objective ways to look at that, but just because a person gets placed in housing afterwards doesn't mean that their life is better as a result of being served in the program. That's the question. We all assume that that's the case, but that's one of the things that's bad about our current system is we need to elevate the voice of people we serve. Don't make so many assumptions. Now, again, is this the best way to do it? Maybe not. We're going to find out. What's not going to happen is we are not going to tie this to system performance or anything like that, at least not in the short term. We need to figure out what is this data telling us? And as people rightly pointed out, how do we do that in a way that's not traumatizing, that's culturally sensitive? So we'll have to look at what that might mean. This might be one of those areas where we recommend that it be administered in a feedback after the fact, right? Or in a survey where the person is not present. You may be doing something like that already. So we'll provide training and ideas around that, but we want to recognize that this element is different from others. It adds layers of complication, but it could potentially add a lot of information around the well-being of the people we're serving as well. So sorry you had to listen to me for so much on that right there, but hopefully that answers the majority of questions. But Mary, I'm sure will chime in if I missed something that you guys put in the chat.
Oh, I think that was great. Thanks, William. So I am not seeing any outstanding questions. We only have about 4 minutes to go on our time. Brian, Jesse, Meredith, Fran, anything to add or flip back to with the few minutes we have left? Nose all around?
I don't think so.
Okay. I tried for, thank you, You all look great today. I tried for a good summertime joke. So, Meredith, what do you get when you cover a tennis racket with ice cream?
A soft serve?
Good job. That's good.
Is that what it is?
It is. That is it does. That's
I'm
what
so
it is.
proud of myself.
You should be. Here's the
The
other
look
one.
of pure joy on Meredith's face as she just unraveled the riddle.
The little things, guys.
My kids,
the little things.
My kids guessed this one, so now I'm going to shoot your self-confidence way down if you don't.
Oh.
What did the left ear say to the right ear?
I don't know.
Nothing. They're both just really good listeners.
Oh.
All right,
really
you guys.
sweet.
Thank you so much for your time. I'm just going to flip through these next few slides. We have resources here for you. We added a couple new ones on the resources slide, so check that out. Make sure you go to the HUD to get these resources. We'll send an announcement when we do. And our next meeting is June 16th. We look forward to talking to you then. Have a great rest of your month.
Thanks, everyone.